Hey everyone, it's Jay again, and today I'm doing something a little different. In this video, I'm going to be playing Dead Frontier Outbreak 2. I just heard about it just moments ago from Michael on Vsauce, and I wanted to try it out. I've never played this before, so let's get started.
On June 29th, 2016, our lives changed forever. A virulent man-made virus had been mysteriously released into the population, mutating the infected into ravenous, flesh-eating zombies. The outbreak had claimed untold lives, but somehow my wife and I had managed to survive. We escaped the carnage of the cities by driving deep into the countryside, hoping to find relative safety at our parents' farm. When we arrived, we were relieved, not only to find her parents still alive, but with the help of the locals, they had managed to fortify the farm. The granary held enough grain to feed us for months, and we had plenty of ammunition. It seemed as though we could survive here almost indefinitely. All too soon, we realized things weren't that simple. With no one working at the local sewage treatment plant, filth had found its way into our drinking water. A disease we had all but forgotten about came back to haunt us: cholera. Without antibiotics to treat the infection, people grew weaker and weaker, and finally died. It was clear that if someone didn't go and find some medicine soon, we'd all be wiped out within a month. Those still healthy enough to hold a gun decided to draw straws. Mine was the shortest. Having been chosen for the mission into town, I wasted no time and started preparing immediately. I realized that even decisions that seemed unimportant at the time could make the difference between life and death later on. With that in mind, I headed to my father-in-law's wardrobe and started to think about what I should wear.
Combat fatigues, camouflage combat fatigues, put on old biker leathers, put on jacket and jeans. I'm gonna put on shorts and a t-shirt would just be a bad idea, in my opinion. It looks like this is just blinking, but let's play a weird glitch or something. Let me put on the camouflaged combat.
I chose to wear the old man's combat fatigues. I hoped it would make me much harder to spot. I knew that I was heading straight into a meat grinder. Zombies still wandered the streets, devouring any living thing that crossed their path. I knew that confrontation with the infected was inevitable, and so after I got dressed, I headed straight for the armory.
I kind of wish you could tell me what type of shotgun and hunting rifle these were. If I'm a good shot, a pistol is all you need. But I'll take the shotgun.
I took the shotgun, realizing it was easy to use and powerful at both close and medium range. Having armed myself, I grabbed a rucksack to carry some additional supplies. It was imperative that I traveled light so I could complete my mission as quickly as possible. My fellow survivors were counting on me getting back with antibiotics as soon as possible, and the risk of being unable to outrun the infected was one I wasn't willing to take.
I really hope I can take more than one thing. So let me take a crowbar.
Both a useful tool and a deadly weapon, the crowbar seemed like the obvious choice.
Oh man.
I was almost ready to leave the safety of the compound. For the first time since arriving, I felt truly afraid. I knew that I may never return from this mission, but if I didn't go, what little remained of my family would be wiped out. I knew my wife was sick, and unless I got her the medicine soon, after all we'd been through, I couldn't let it end like this. the stairs to our bedroom and slowly pushed open the door. My wife lay asleep in bed. She was pale and her body dripped with sweat. She had had a fever for some time, and I knew that without medicine she wouldn't last much longer. I leant over and kissed her gently on the forehead, whispered, "Goodbye, my love," and then silently left the room. As I walked back down the stairs, I swore to myself that I would find the antibiotics she needed or die trying.
No, don't die trying. Just
I took a deep breath and stepped out of the compound into the wasteland beyond. I heard the gate swinging closed, followed by the unmistakable sound of it being securely locked behind me. I started walking and didn't look back. As I began my journey, I realized that I had quite a way to go, and I considered finding alternative transportation. I had to walk quite a long distance from the compound before I found a suitable car. It was in remarkably good condition despite the outbreak, and seemed almost brand new. When I realized the doors were locked, I decided to smash one of the windows. This turned out to be a fatal mistake. The car alarm summoned all the infected into the area, and before I could get the engine running, I was overwhelmed, pulled out of the car through the broken window and devoured.
Wow, that was fast.
I took a deep breath and stepped out of the compound into the wasteland.
Let's show the bicycle then.
I had to walk quite a while before I eventually spotted an old and slightly rusty bicycle sticking out of a hedgerow. It wasn't in very good shape, but it was about rideable, and still a hell of a lot quicker than walking. Unfortunately, just before I reached the outskirts of town, the chain snapped. I would have to continue on foot, but at least I saved myself a lot of time and effort.
That's good.
After a couple of hours, I eventually came to the outskirts of town. The place had been pretty run down even before the outbreak, and I had struggled to imagine it being any worse than I remembered. I was wrong. Once the streets had been the home of petty gangs and prostitutes, but now they were littered with decaying, half-eaten corpses. The air was thick with flies, and maggots crawled and squirmed among the bodies. I took a moment to regain my composure, and then pressed on, trying not to notice what I was standing on. As I turned the corner, I saw another man standing some distance down the road. I had no idea if it was a survivor like myself, or one of the infected. I couldn't be sure if the man was still human or not, and I didn't want to waste ammo unnecessarily. There were plenty of cars and other debris between us, so I decided to carefully sneak past him instead. He didn't seem to notice me. Having dealt with the situation, I continued on down the street towards a small chemist. To my relief and surprise, the building didn't show any outward signs of having been looted. The door was closed and the glass window was still intact. I glanced around to make sure there were no infected nearby, and then tried the door. It was locked. I took out the crowbar and wedged it between the door and the frame. With a little bit of effort, I was able to lever the door open, allowing only a brief cracking noise to give away my position. As I entered the building and looked around, I realized that the antibiotics I so desperately needed would be kept in the back of the shop, so I carefully made my way towards the counter. Just in front of it, I noticed a body wearing what appeared to be a white lab coat. It was probably the chemist. From the blood stain and bullet hole in his back, I surmised that he had been shot to death. Survived the outbreak this long by taking unnecessary chances. I swung the crowbar at his head over and over again, until all that was left was a bloody red mush on the carpet. Not even the infected could survive that. As I walked into the back room, my heart sank. While the front of the shop had been left untouched, looters had clearly broken in at the back and taken all the medicine. Most likely, drug addicts in search of a fix. I searched everywhere, but the only thing left was a few tubes of hemorrhoid cream. I made my way back to the front of the shop and realized that my mission was far from over. I wondered if I could find any extra supplies before continuing. I realized that a place like this probably sold some basic first aid kits and equipment. It didn't take long to find what I was after. I put it in my backpack and then headed back outside. I pressed down towards the local mall. It was the only other place in town that I knew for sure had a pharmacy. There may have been other places, but I didn't know where they were, and didn't want to risk getting eaten alive while looking for something that might not exist. As the mall finally came into view, I felt a strange mix of relief and horror. I was now close to my goal, but it seemed that the last few hundred yards would pose an almost insurmountable problem. The plaza in front of the building was infested with zombies, idly wandering in circles and occasionally bumping into each other. As I wondered what to do next, the wind suddenly changed direction, carrying my scent toward the pack of infected. In near perfect unison, the infected sniffed the air and turned to stare directly at me. A split second later, they charged. Post-human cannibals, so I turned on my heels and fled as quickly as I could. The infected were surprisingly fast on their feet, but luckily they struggled to avoid the mass of abandoned vehicles and debris that covered the road. I was able to lose most of them by running around the block, and those that still followed were quite a distance behind me. As I returned to the plaza, I realized that not many of the zombies had chased me as I had originally thought. Unable to reach the main entrance, and with the infected now approaching from all sides, I had no choice but to run down a small side alley. There was still a single doorway into the mall, and luckily it was still unlocked. I slammed the door shut behind me. It seemed reasonably strong, and was small enough to prevent large numbers of infected from pushing against it all at once. Still, leaving it as it was definitely posed a risk. To barricade the door with. Luckily, there were some old tables and chairs nearby, which I was easily able to wedge in front of the entrance. Now that I was reasonably sure that the infected wouldn't be getting into the building the same way I did, my attention turned to my new surroundings. I was in a long hallway with several storage rooms on either side. From the vague odor of damp and chemicals, I realized this was obviously some kind of basement used primarily by the cleaning staff. I could see a stairwell leading up to the main building at the end of the hall. I searched the various side rooms for useful supplies, but it was a total waste of time. The only things that hadn't already been looted were mops and industrial cleaning products. I climbed the flight of stairs to the ground floor, and then headed through a small doorway into the main building. The mall was eerily quiet, and despite my best efforts to keep a low profile, every footstep seemed to echo throughout the entire building. The shutters on most stores had been closed, presumably in an attempt to keep the infected from roaming freely. Frequent bloodstains were an ever-present reminder of how little the shopkeepers had achieved. A sickening feeling in my gut told me this place had been the scene of a terrible massacre. As I slowly made my way to the central square, I recalled that the pharmacy was up on the second floor. I could see no signs of life, human or otherwise, and so decided to ascend the nearest escalator and secure the medicine the folks back at the farm so desperately needed. Before I could reach it, the silence was broken by a tremendous bang, swiftly followed by something whizzing an inch past my head. Someone had taken a shot at me. was shooting at me, but before I could finish the sentence, several more rounds had been fired and 2 of them hit me in the head. I was dead before my body hit the ground.
Really?
I climbed the flight of stairs.
Take cover.
I immediately dove for the nearest pillar as several more bullets were fired. Amazingly, I wasn't hit. The pillar offered temporary respite from my assailants, but it would only be a matter of time before they outflanked me. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them maneuvering on the floor above. I had to act fast if I was to have any chance of survival. I realized that they had me totally pinned down, and that my chances of surviving a firefight were slim. My only hope was to try and convince them to let me live. I cried, "I'm not infected," as loud as I could. There was a pause, followed by a voice full of fear and doubt. "Prove it." He ordered me to put my gun on the ground and step slowly out from behind the pillar with my hands up. I could see no alternative, and so I reluctantly did what I was told. As I stood defenseless in the open, I explained that I hadn't been bitten, and that I meant them no harm. The survivors whispered among themselves for a moment, before one of them asked me to take off my clothes so they could see for themselves. I undressed and a man armed with a shotgun came down to inspect me. Finally satisfied that I wasn't about to eat them, the man asked me why I was here. I still wasn't sure if the other survivors would let me live, so I decided it would be best to make them think they needed me. I told them about the compound in the countryside, and that I had come to town looking to rescue survivors. Some didn't believe me, but most just didn't seem interested in leaving. Still, they let me join them on the 2nd floor. As I climbed the escalator, I realized just how wise my decision to surrender had been. There were at least 20 survivors in the building, with over half of them armed with shotguns or rifles. The rest had an assortment of vicious-looking melee weapons. As soon as I reached the top, I was directed toward their leader, a tall and muscular African-American who introduced himself as Ox. Ox told me that if I wanted his help and protection, or at least to be allowed to roam his mall freely, I had to earn it. Apparently there was no longer any power in the mall, and he wanted someone to head down to the basement and turn on the generator.
Are you kidding?
The last man he sent never came back.
Oh, fantastic.
I told him I'd be happy to help, but that I desperately needed some more equipment if I was going to survive. He grudgingly agreed and got one of his lackeys to hand over some ammo. I was then informed that I'd be taking a mechanic named Smith along with me, partly to fix the generator if it needed it, and partly to make sure I didn't try anything stupid.
I was really hoping I could get the medicine right now.
Smith and I went back down the escalator and through the door I had originally come through to the stairwell. We headed back down, and then Smith pointed out another doorway hidden under the stairs that I hadn't noticed before. I carefully opened the door with my gun at the ready. Ox obviously thought this place was dangerous, so I kept my guard up. On the other side of the door it was pitch black. If there were any windows, they were small, and the curtains or blinds were closed. We listened carefully for any signs of the infected, but heard nothing. We weren't about to proceed without a light source, but luckily Smith had a few matches on him. We lit one and slowly made our way into the room. The match didn't offer much illumination, but it was enough to make our way to the generator without making any undue noise. We reached the generator. Smith promptly pulled a lever and pressed a few buttons. Apparently getting the thing up and running was as simple as that, because it immediately sprang to life. The lights in the room flashed and came on, and just in time. Our activities had disturbed a small group of infected who had been lurking in a side room, and they were now rushing toward us. I opened fire and was easily able to gun the bastards down. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned to Smith, but to my horror he was lying on the floor, bleeding heavily. In the confusion I had accidentally shot him in the leg. I knew Smith didn't have a lot of time, so I quickly removed the first aid kit from my backpack and got to work. I used a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding, and then bandaged the wound. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do. I helped him to his feet, and we headed back to the group. When we reached the stairwell, we were greeted by a terrifying noise. All the sudden, by our and the bright lights of the mall had attracted a large group of infected who were trying to get in any way they could. I seriously regretted that I had not done more to barricade this part of the building when I first arrived. The back door suddenly burst open and a horde of ravenous infected cannibals flooded inside. I knew there was no point trying to kill them, so I turned on my heel and ran as fast as I could. I made it as far as the escalator before my fate was sealed. When the others saw the swarm of infected chasing after me, they immediately began shooting indiscriminately into the mob. Several rounds struck me in the chest, and as I fell to my knees, the pack of infected descended upon me. As I climbed the escalator, I realized just how wise my decision to surrender had been. There were at least 20 survivors in the building with...
Okay. Let me stop it for here. Stop it for now here. And if you guys like it,